Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Govs on the Go Alumni Edition, a new podcast featuring alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzz Hoon. I'm the Dean of the College. I'm also the host of the podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Hallie Hogan from the class of 1984. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Hogan.
Thank you very much.
And before we get into all the career journey, let's give everybody a life update. Where are you? What's going on?
Okay. For those who knew me, I was Hallie Coppage back in the day, and
Okay.
Hogan is my married name. So I moved to North Carolina about 21 years ago, and took a job at Elon University. And I got married to Charles Hogan, and I have my new name. And so I've been teaching at Elon ever since. We moved recently, a few years ago, to High Point, North Carolina, the furniture capital of the world, which is just down the street from Burlington. And because he has a really nice job at St. Mary's Episcopal Church there. And we enjoy being in this community. So I'm now I have friends in both places, both High Point and Burlington. My mother-in-law lives in Burlington too, so that's nice. So I get to stay with her a couple of days a week when I go to work. And so now I'm currently still teaching voice primarily and other music-related courses, and I am the chair of the music department at Elon. And Charles and I have a daughter who's in law school, and we have two wonderful pets, Susie, a mutt, who's a fabulous dog, and Jasmine, our cat.
And you were sharing with me that you grew up from in Clarksville, and so we're going to talk about some early influences as a young person growing up in Tennessee. So,
Right.
I always think it's interesting to find out, especially from somebody like you that is a performer, somebody at some point in your life, you must have realized, I have no fear. I have this really, a desire that I can sing, or I can dance, I can entertain. When did that come to you?
Well, that's a good question. Because it's very interesting. My sister, Rosanna, is about 8 years older than me. And so growing up, I had a really colorful childhood, lots of books and music always in the house. And my mother used to actually be a dance teacher before she became a school teacher. And so, there was a lot of culture to be had, all kinds, really. When I look back on that, back in those days, growing up in the 60s and the 70s, there were a lot of only 3 or 4 channels on television, but you had access to so many different kinds of music. And of course, musical theater was a great love of my sisters and of all my family. We loved that. And, who didn't? So, we engaged, or my sister and I certainly engaged in all kinds of musical activities from elementary through high school. We went to Clarksville High School, and that high school had a really fine theater and music program. I consider myself so very lucky that I had a really wonderful choral experience in high school, because I've actually realized that many people did not have that, and so that I'm very grateful for that experience. And I guess as a child, it was sort of part of my life, but I was a pretty shy kid. My sister was very what you'd say an extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really an introvert, but my mother would kind of give me these little monologues to learn, and I would be in those little 4-H competitions, and I would do really well. And once I'd get up on the stage, I'd come alive, and it was like this whole different world, that just was a separate world from just the everyday. And so it's very important for people to find their interests and their loves, whether that is in some sort of theatrical or musical endeavor, or if it's in woodworking or athletics or whatever it might be. I think you just really need that place to go that brings you so much joy. And it did. And so I got hooked on it. And I did a lot of activities in high school related to that. And my first few years in college, couple years in college rather, I really didn't know what I wanted to do though, because I had a lot of interests and I was interested in a lot of subjects. And my parents were big readers and they kept up with politics and all sorts of things. So I had a lot of different interests. And quite frankly, it was a little later that that I did finally settle on music. And I'm glad I did, because I had some great teachers.
Yeah, and a very successful career. And we were kind of talking that as your mom is an educator and your dad that he was an accountant, but then also started working here at Austin Peay. So he certainly understood the benefit of a higher education and degree, and the impact that it would have on you. All those kind of things provide, I think, the support for somebody that's also trying to discover their way. Somebody like you were exposed to so many different things, and that was probably a wise choice for them to make sure that their children had the ability to find their own way.
Yes, and they were very, very encouraging of that. Education was always a big part of my family going back, because both of my grandmothers, my maternal and my paternal grandmothers, were school teachers.
Oh.
So back in the day, the beginning of the 20th century. And so that was it, that was just kind of second nature, just learning and reading books. And we had access to so many books like that. And yes, they were always encouraging. I think the whole, going down the music or theatrical track, I think that makes a lot of parents nervous to a certain extent, because there's always those worries about supporting yourself, and you don't think of that as, how shall I say, maybe a solid footing financially in life. But along the way, they always supported me all through my college training, all the way up through my doctorate. And I think they realized that it was important to pursue what you love, and eventually you kind of figure out how to, bring it all together. And that is what happened to me, thankfully.
Now, I'm wondering if there was an instance and some experience, something that you may remember, that somebody gave you some really positive feedback on when you performed, when you sang a song, that you thought to yourself, maybe I am talented, or maybe I have this gift. Is there a time where maybe that came upon you?
Yeah. I told you that, the first 2 years of college, or 2-3 years of college, I kind of just sort of, I drifted. I love to read. I love literature. I loved history. And I had friends all along the way who I would still kind of do some things here and there. And I would sing at parties, Christmas parties and things like that.
Wow.
And they'd always say, well, why aren't you doing this? and finally I just thought, well, I don't really know. And I also realized that I think, in high school, because I did so much that was theater and music focused, I think there was a little part of me that kind of felt like I missed out on learning those basics, because I was just kind of this little, little girl who liked to sing. And then it was like, oh, well, I really want to learn other kinds of things about the world. And so that's what I did. But then I came back, because that was truly where my talent lay. I really was a singer and an actress. And so, I think it was just some very soft encouragement from friends that I knew. And then, of course, when I got into school and I studied with Sharon Mabry, I remember the first lesson I had with her, and I met her, and I was a little nervous because I knew she was just had this incredible reputation, and everybody talked about how wonderful she was, and she was, but she was also extremely approachable and very kind. And so she had me warm up a little bit, and I brought a couple of songs and I sang for her and did some things. And at the end of the lesson, she said, well, because I wanted to study with her, but I wasn't quite enrolled as a music student yet. I needed to audition first. And so she listened to me and she said, well, Hallie, she said, I think you just have a beautiful voice and I think you can do anything with it that you want to do. So that was kind of it. It was like, oh, all right, well, there's the confirmation. So I'm going to head out on this path. And it was great.
So as you were a student, obviously that you probably were, as you said, had this musical theater sort of background, but you were probably getting exposed to music, to genres, to doing some songs that you had never been exposed to.
Oh, you are so right about that. And that is something that I think to myself how grateful I am to have been able to have learned about that music, because I knew classical music. Again, my parents, like a lot of parents of that day, had like those Time Warner records where they'd have the great symphonies, and we had all the Beethoven symphonies, and I listened to those, as a kid. And then we had those Disney, like the Fantasia album, and that was all classical music, Night on Bald Mountain and all these things. So I knew some things. Of course, Handel's Messiah, we sang that at my high school, parts of that every, holiday season. But I had no idea what all was out there. And I had no idea that there's still music like that that is currently written. I think people have a tendency to think, classical music, that's Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn, and that's it, and they don't really know a lot beyond that. And they also think of it basically as symphonic music. And a lot of people don't even like opera because they've just decided they don't like it. They may not have tried it, but sometimes that seems to be a little off-putting for some folks. But I fell in love with every bit of it. There was all these rich, beautiful art songs in French and German, and American art songs that spoke to my heart, with set to American poetry, all these wonderful poets. And it just was so satisfying. And being there at that time at Austin P with her and working with George Mabry, who was this wonderful choral conductor, and my friends who were just equally fired up. I had about 4 friends who were equally as fired up about it as I was. It's a time that I'll never forget, and probably one of the happiest times of my life, because we were all, learning about this wonderful new world, and yet having a lot of fun doing it. It wasn't stuffy. It wasn't. I think sometimes some people have that view maybe about studying classical music, that it's rather stuffy and what have you. And there are environments like that, but at Austin P, it wasn't that way at all. It was just joyous, with all the ensemble singing and everything. So yes, and I tell my students now, because a lot of them, they want to do what they want to do. A lot of them are music theater folks, and that's fine. And we certainly learn all of that kind of music. And some of them really kind of want to do more popular music, and we have every kind of singer imaginable. But I always say, you're in college once, and I said, this is where you're going to learn about this, and why not learn about it? Because probably when you get out of school, you're going to be preoccupied with your road, whatever it is that you're doing. And but this opened up a beautiful new world to me, and I loved singing all that music throughout for quite a while during my life.
And it's no surprise to me to now know that you are doing the same thing for other people, that you are returning what was given to you, and that's a wonderful sort of thing. Let's talk a little bit about your friends, though, because what I find fascinating in some ways is, for students that are within the same major, sometimes they can feel, especially music students, they can feel that sort of competition with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Which is good. It certainly makes you want to, be as good as you can. But there, I also see a lot of support, and I'm sure you got that from your friends.
Oh, I did. And you're right. Of course, there's always competition. There'd be competition for roles in the opera workshops and competition for solos and concerts and different sorts of things. That's part of it. You just learn that sometimes you have to compete, and that's just kind of how it is. I mean, I think of people on swim teams or track teams or whatever, they compete against one another, but oftentimes, they're very close to one another too. But I those folks were so encouraging, and we were all very different from one another. And I think that's part of it too. So we weren't actually necessarily usually competing against one another because we had different voices. A couple of them were guys, and so they weren't necessarily competing for the same things I'd be competing for. And as I recall, we actually all wound up sort of having the opportunity to shine from time to time. It's not like one of us got everything all the time. We got opportunities to work with one another. And that was always just great fun doing that. Yeah, I consider that I was very fortunate to have those folks. And actually one of them who graduated with me, or actually he graduated a little later, he was a little bit younger than I was responsible for helping me to find employment later on. So it's good to keep those connections and nourish those relationships for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's a lesson you learned very early on, evidently.
Mhm. Yeah.
So when you graduated from Austin P, did you immediately go into graduate school? Did you decide did you search, and because at some point you were also performing and getting some experiences during that, right?
Right. I immediately did go to graduate school. I went to the University of Louisville, and that was a lovely school. I had a wonderful voice teacher there. I'm pretty fortunate that all my voice teachers were really good. And that was Don Everett. I studied with there. He was a baritone, and he was different from Sharon, but that was good for me because he was a lot more strict. And at that point, I kind of needed somebody like that because it was like, are you going to do this or not? And I was a little older, and so it just felt a little more real, I suppose. Not that it wasn't real at Austin P, but it was such a nurturing environment there. And this was more, you're a working musician. So that was great because I grew up quite a bit. And I got to sing a lot at Louisville. I actually went back a few years ago and I sang at his big retirement going away event, and it was so great to see him and so many people that I went to school with there that I also made very close friends with. So I stayed in Louisville for a while, and I sang in a lot of things in that area, and I performed with a lot of the churches and the oratorio societies. I did a little bit of musical theater there, and some opera scenes, mainly kind of outreach sorts of things. And I also worked with, and I kind of always kept that theatrical bent going wherever I went, because that was something I had that some singers were not as comfortable with, but that was just always part of me. And so that allowed me to do things that actually were very fruitful in terms of just entertainment. And so I did a lot of cabaret shows, and I did those with some of my opera friends that I made there. And that was always so much fun. We'd perform at all of these big banks and fundraisers and things like that. So it was the sort of musical theatrical world. And I stayed there for a while when I was performing. And then later on, I kind of moved beyond that too.
Was it at some point did you come to the conclusion that you wanted to eventually teach, and that's why you were working towards eventually a terminal degree?
Yeah, I taught some in Louisville. I had a graduate assistantship at University of Louisville, and then I taught for a while at Bellarmine University, which is a private school there in Louisville. And I married and moved on to another locale, went up to Michigan and did some singing there, sang a lot of musical theater there. And yeah, eventually I just sort of thought, I think I want to go into teaching. If I can. It's, academia, it's not exactly the easiest thing to go into, but I kind of felt like if I got the doctorate, I might have a pretty good chance because I'd done several things and I had the strength of sort of walking between these two worlds, between
Right.
the classical world and the musical theater world, which did eventually serve me pretty well. So I went to the University of Louisville. I got an assistantship there, teaching assistantship there. I loved that university as well. Big school, Big Ten school, very different from anything I'd known. And I got to perform with the opera theater there and also with their oratorio societies. And my life took a little bit of a turn, and my marriage ended at that point, and I remained there though, and that was a great place to be. It was Champaign-Urbana was a very interesting place, and there were lots of opportunities for me. And again, I made a lot of friends. I've always made these wonderful friends, and even friends that are not even musical. That I've really been so appreciative of all throughout my entire life. And then it was there, I was finishing my doctorate. I got a chance to work with John Wustman, who was a world-renowned accompanist. He accompanied all the big stars like Pavarotti and Leontyne Price and these big names in opera. And so I got to take classes with him and perform with him. That was a very enriching, wonderful experience. And then I got a call from a friend of mine one of the friends from Austin P, who was working at Elon, and they needed a music director for a show and for a winter term. And so I went down there and I did that. And then a couple of years later, there was an opening for a position, and he called me about that. And so I applied for that, and here I am, lo and behold. And that was great. And I was ready to really devote everything to teaching. I will say that in classical singing, I always, not always, but at some point in all of that, I developed a pretty severe case of performance anxiety with classical singing. Now, I didn't have this with anything else. I could stand up and talk to 300 people without a script, and I was never nervous. And I certainly never was nervous doing any kind of musical theater. I don't know. It was just so, it was so ingrained in my childhood, I think, that it just seemed pretty simple. The classical music, I loved it. Once I got into it and I was doing it, I was on fire and I was so happy, and I loved the rehearsal process. But, over time, I was kind of getting very tired because there would be this sort of period of about 48 hours where I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat very well. And it was difficult, and it was difficult for me to talk about because it felt, I felt a little ashamed of that. I don't now because I think that, we know so much more about how people are wired and different things. There's so much more conversation about that sort of thing. But I just realized that it was worth it for a while because I loved it so much. So I would just go through whatever so that I could get up there and do it. And it was almost like this sort of out of body experience to sing Mozart or to sing Brahms or, Samuel Barber, some of these wonderful composers' music. But then I started to get to a point where, I don't think I can do this full time. Being a classical, yeah, there was a cost. Being a classical performer requires a lot of grit. You have to obviously be talented and love it, But you have to be pretty strong too. You have to really be able to your body has to be in tip-top shape. You know, particularly if you're a singer, I mean, you can't get a cold at all. A cold is as bad as, a serious disease for a
Mm.
singer. And you just, if you're going to really pursue that professionally, you've got to figure out a way to do that and yet still have some sort of income. So if you're working, you have to be strong enough to then go to an audition and take off and do all these things. And I think as much as I loved it, it was the way that I was doing it was taking a toll. So to get a full-time job like I did, it was a saving grace, and I was still able to do some concerts, which that was not difficult for me to do within that setting. My husband and I went to England, and we did a couple of recitals together there a few years ago. And that was just really beautiful. I've had some really nice times. But yeah, I mean, I guess everybody just kind of has to figure out their way, you have all of these great experiences, but nothing ends. I noticed that, with a lot of my students, they want to figure things out. And I was that way too. You want to say, okay, I'm going to study this and then I'm going to be this.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can't just be something. You are who you are. And then, as you study and explore and, drink all of that in, that all just sort of integrates with who you are. And you can't just be, trying to oversee and control everything. So that was kind of a meandering answer there.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it shows that you are finding along your career path the joys in life, and like you had mentioned, performing with your husband, and that collaborative effort. I'm sure was very. It has been a great blessing for you.
Oh, it certainly has. He's a fabulous pianist. I really have enjoyed working with him, and then he does a lot of solo work too, and also plays with various instrumentalists in the area. So yeah, I mean, it's part of my life. It will, it continues to be a part of my life, and yeah, I mean, I never regret studying music. It has brought so much to me, indeed.
Let's talk about another thing that you had mentioned, which was taking kids over in a study abroad to Italy
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
Florence, and that sounds like just a wonderful experience, and probably changes them like you have been impacted in other ways.
You're exactly right. That certainly has been a big highlight of my teaching career. We have a really good study abroad area at Elon, Global Studies, and most of our students at that school get an opportunity to study abroad at some point, either in a kind of a winter term short opportunity or a full semester. And so professors can apply to teach during those full semesters. We have a little apartment there in a center that we are affiliated with. And I went ahead and put my name down, and I had to wait about 10 years to get my opportunity because, of course, lots of people wanted to do that. But it came my way the spring of 2019, and I felt so fortunate because it was before COVID hit. So I had that opportunity to go, and they asked that you develop a course. And so I developed a course on Italian opera through more of sort of a societal cultural lens. So not a history of opera course where you study sort of the nuts and bolts of composition and the styles of the composers. I mean, some of that is integrated with it, but it's really more of a look at how opera was born in Italy and why it was born in Italy, and what makes it so very unique. The language, the historical aspect of the Medicis and all of these families that supported art and music during the Renaissance, and how it grew, and how it also it really influenced the business side of music and performance because of all of the opera houses that sprang up in Venice and throughout Italy, and how that just spread throughout all of Europe in terms of the theaters and how the theaters were constructed, and how then that became kind of a part of society, and all of it meshed together, So I was really excited to get to do that. I'd love to do it again. I feel like I'd be better at it a second time. But these students, we were in Florence, and so we visited some theaters, and we went to some courtyards where performances would have happened back during the probably in the 1600s. And we went to a couple of I introduced a lot of students to opera who would have never had that opportunity, because most of these students were not music students. I think one or two were like music and liberal arts, and then there were some dance majors, but most of them were people like strategic communications and business and that sort of thing. So we had a good time. I think that they gained a lot from the experience. They got to see Madame Butterfly, which is a good opera for a novice to hear, because it's engaging, it's very dramatic, and the music is really, really beautiful. And so I think that they certainly did get a lot out of it. And I had a little project where they each got to write their own opera, and they didn't write music, but they sort of, wrote a storyline. And so we had some fun with it. And I got to live in Florence for several months and live. And my husband went with me, and he really enjoyed himself, because he just, cooked a lot, and we ate a lot of food and toured
Lots of good
toured
food
Italy.
there. Oh my, the
Uh-huh.
immersion in that culture. Well, you and I will have to talk about that off the episode, to talk about how much, I went there last spring and enjoyed every moment too.
Oh, it's a beautiful, and the people are very friendly people. And we just adored it. He didn't want to come back, really. I'm a little more pragmatic, and I'm like, well, we got to go back. I think if he could have lived there, I think we would have stayed.
Maybe retirement,
Exactly. You never know. They might need to learn about American opera and American musical theater. Who knows?
Right. Well, one other thing that I want to talk a little bit about is how did you become a department chair? Because I think that's again, it's a very important job in academia. For those that don't know, I say it's the hardest job at a university, but somebody, I'm sure that you're a natural leader. You sound like a person that wants to help other people, and that's really the role of a department chair.
That's true. That's very true. I've heard that quote before too, that it's the hardest job on campus. And I guess I kind of I didn't see myself doing this really, but because I had been at Elon a long time, I knew when I took the job that this was going to be a long-term commitment. I didn't have a great deal of, at that point in my life, I wanted a nice place to work and work with some great students. And I was getting that. And I didn't really see myself as, some people who are really young going in academia at say, 28 or something like that, they're doing the stepping stones. But I'd already had a career of teaching mainly as an adjunct and singing and performing and doing all of that. So it was like, this is a very nice way to, continue to do what I do in a nice place. But because I'd been there quite a while, when the previous chair was leaving, I was sort of a natural person to go into this role, because we had some new people on faculty who weren't in a place to take that on. They just didn't have the seniority. Some of them have families, young children, and they didn't really want to do that when they were raising other kids. So I was happy to serve. And that's one of the things I always stress about this for those people who think they might want to do it. This is a service role. You are serving your department to make it better and to help your faculty be better. It is not some, grand, promotion to being the president or something like that. It's very interesting in so many ways. I've learned so much about administration that I didn't know. And but you are really in between, because you go and you meet with your deans and you hear about things that the provost is doing, or the president initiatives and all this stuff. And you're talking to these deans, and you kind of then you start to understand the way the upper administration thinks. And it's like, okay. And then you go back to your department and you're really kind of trying to find ways where, maybe you can work with rules that might seem to some people on faculty a bit constricting, or shall I say not fair, or whatever, but then also, helping your department, grow according to the initiatives of those in the higher administrative area. And so, trying to be, you're just a diplomat, back and forth, and trying to be understanding of the needs of both of these worlds and how they must work together in order to really keep that university growing and getting better and better and better. And so, in a way, it's been exciting. We are now hiring 3 new people on faculty, and that's exciting to have these searches. We hired a new person last year. We're in a kind of a transition where we're getting newer, younger, and the ones that were younger when I took this are now getting a little older. So I'm hoping they're going to take this over in a couple more years. I signed on for 2 more years. I was only going to do this 4 years. And I will pat myself on the back because some of my faculty said, well, we don't want you to go. Why are you leaving? And so I said, okay, because it is interesting. It's interesting. You have to write a lot. You write a lot of reports. You're in the middle of, if there's, parents get upset about something or something like that. But I don't know. It's very stimulating because I don't sing a lot anymore. I have sung a couple of weddings and a funeral, and I sang every now and then I'll sing a couple of songs on a faculty gala or something like that. But that part of my life has become smaller, and now I'm learning more about something else, which is good as you get older, because you need to always kind of stimulate your brain and learn new things. So, it's I like I said, I never saw myself doing this, but now that I'm doing it, I've fully embraced it. And always what drives me is my love of music. I want music departments to succeed. I want them to be relevant to the rest of the world, because sometimes that's a little difficult to argue that it is relevant, and classical music is still really relevant. And so, I like it because I can champion something that I'm pretty passionate about.
You mentioned being around new faculty and the energy and the enthusiasm, that when I talk with young faculty here or anywhere else, it's always the same. I feel I kind of love that energy that they bring. And it makes me think how I've sort of grown as an educator. And now looking back a little bit, how do you think you've grown as an educator?
I think I'm a whole lot more patient. Like a lot of folks, when you get out of that doctoral world, and when you're in that world, it is just all about the best of the best and being very thorough in your research on things and speaking intelligently about your area. And I see this a lot with young faculty. Then they come to a place where they're working with people who are, first year sophomores, very, very young people, and they start putting those standards on them. And it's hard on those students because they simply don't have that whole life that person has had, and they're not in that graduate world. The graduate world is very, very different. And I was a little that way myself when I first got into it. I had been teaching already some as an adjunct, but I was a little bit more demanding in a way that maybe was not as sympathetic, and I'm a lot more patient. I'm a lot more able, interestingly enough, I'm a little more able to put myself in their shoes. I'm a little more uh, empathetic, I think, and I start to really understand that they're in a very different world. And of course, students now, they've grown up with all of this social media, which has very much shaped and framed the way of thinking and their perspectives. And I have to always kind of be aware of that and realize that you know, a person from my generation can give them something, rather unique, in that maybe they start to think, in a way that is more, I don't know, less about what's going on in the world around them and more about what's happening right now in this moment in their lives, and how wonderful it is to be in a creative field where you're just always growing.
Mm.
And so I know that that's a big thing that has really, really improved. I'm better at, I think I'm better at communication. I was always good, I think, at meeting students where they were, but I would sometimes be, want them, try to encourage them more to go on a path that I thought was right. And I'm better at sort of realizing, sometimes you need to let students, if they maybe don't want to do something or they don't want to stay a music major or whatever, then that's okay. And to just be a little bit more understanding about where they are. I would say that's the main thing. I think my techniques probably are a little bit better too, just because I continue to learn about singing. So I think that's probably good. But I feel like always had a pretty good foundation, again, based on my training that started with Sharon Mabry.
Yeah, I like how you meant, I think you wrote this about yourself, that you were continuing to learn
Mhm.
after all these years. And I think that, as an educator, we all hopefully have that same attitude, that we've never become the expert that we think that you need to be at a certain level. If, a very humble approach is that every student will provide a different opportunity
Mhm.
to help share information, but also learn from them.
Mhm. Oh, very definitely. I mean, I always ask my students tons of questions just about, what they do, and how they see things, because yeah, it's very interesting. But it's also wonderful to play. One of the great things about technology is we have YouTube, where there are all these fabulous old performances of these wonderful artists. And so I bring that up a lot. I have a diction for singers class, and I'll bring up some of these artists and we'll listen to them sing. And they're fascinated with that, because it's a lot of people they don't know. I'll mention people I'll think they'll know, and they don't. And so all of a sudden, they're hearing sounds and music in a different way, and I really enjoy that I enjoy that they really react to it, because I think sometimes, all of us from different generations will dismiss different generations, oh, well, they're just blah blah blah, or they just think about that. We have to be careful about not doing that, because we're all human at heart. And, if something's really wonderful, I mean, I think all of us can relate to that, wonderful singer. So, so it's good. It's good to try to keep up with the younger people.
So one of the things we always like to end with is a question about what kind of advice do you have to students? And I'm sure this is something that you are talking with your students there at Elon all the time,
Mhm.
or prospective students, about why they should be a major in music in some area.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I try to tell them all the time to stay in the moment, and to enjoy as much as they possibly can those college years. To, if they're studying a subject, to shut everything else out and focus on that and be in the moment. And, realize sometimes what I find, this is what always happens with the first year students. They'll come in and they're very excited and it's just, oh yeah, wow, I'm going to do this and that. And then about a third of the way through that first semester, all of a sudden they're looking really weary and they get all sad and I can't do anything and I made a big mistake, blah, 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 blah. You've only been here a month. I think you're being a little dramatic, but anyway, that comes from, I think, youth. You think this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to be, as I said earlier when I was talking about, and it's just kind of, tell students to take a deep breath and realize that this is part of what is really just wonderful about living is sometimes you don't know. But that's all right to not know, and you will figure that out. And rather than just pulling away and then trying to do something different, just be there, just be in the engage with your faculty, engage with your teachers, engage with your friends, and realize that just being in college is a wonderful time of your life. Not only because of all the wonderful things you'll learn from your academics, but it's just a great time to be alive and to not worry too much about what's going to happen afterwards. I mean, I know all of us need to go on, but you do. I don't know that I would have thought that a lot of things that have happened to me would have happened when I was there. But I don't regret any of the music that I learned. I learned so much and I loved college. I didn't want to get out. That's why I'm teaching at a college. I just never wanted to leave, And so that's something I certainly found out about myself. I was in love with that whole process of learning. And so, I just say, slow down, take a deep breath, enjoy, smell the roses. And even if if from your point of view that you fail from time to time, that's not the end of the world. It's really, really not. You have to fail some. That's just part of living and growing. So I guess that would be what I would say.
Well, terrific advice. Terrific advice, Hallie. And I tell you, I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I can see why the Mabrys are so in love with you, and so glad that you were connected with Austin Peay.
Oh, well, I'm in love with them too. They're great. And thank you, Buzz. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk. I was in Clarksville not too long ago, and it was amazing how it's changed and the university has changed. And that's just, part of progress, that's what happens. But I will always hold that place very dear in my heart.
Well, thank you for your time, and hopefully in sometime in the future we will meet face to face next time you're in Clarksville.
Well, thank you, Buzz. I'd love that. Take care.
And thanks for all of our viewers and listeners out there for checking out the podcast. We hope that you will join us as we continue to profile some of the outstanding alumni we have in the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.